My name is Amber Lee, and I live here in Asheville, North Carolina, with my dog, Captain. Captain is the love of my life. He's an Alaskan Klekai Husky with a mostly black coat, but with streaks of white fur around his legs and face, not to mention little rings of dark fur around his pale blue eyes that make him kind of look like the Hamburglar. I rescued him from a shelter when he was just a puppy, right after my fiancé moved out to Hong Kong for work. He helped me through the initial loneliness on nights when I just couldn't handle getting into an empty bed for the 50th time, and in the years that followed when my husband decided he would be better off starting a family with a Chinese woman he met through his job. Captain helped me through the heartbreak. Captain is a big guy, a subwoofer. While other dogs need walks, Captain needs hikes. Which is why, every weekend for the past few years, I would drive him out to a national forest, Nantala to be exact. One of the few places he could really be. Dogs just aren't meant to be cooped up indoors. They need to run, they need to explore, they need a place like this. And coincidentally, so did I. This national forest was a place I could really lose myself, a place to escape the pressure of high-pressure, high-paying job. The woods were a place of sanctuary to me, but that all changed one chilly October day when I came to realize that there is a damned good reason why human beings have walled themselves off in towns and cities, because the wilderness, it seems, is not our friend. Captain was always his happiest in the woods. For such a majestic animal, he has an uncanny ability to act goofy as hell, and the woods brought that out of him in spades. He'd be so lost in the feeling of pure freedom, his blue eyes all wide with his tongue lolling out to one side of his mouth, riding the wave of zoomies that inevitably had me laughing at how dorky he acted. So, you could imagine how quickly I noticed a change in his behavior, how he went from being such a loud, boisterous dog to a quivering, whining wreck that barely ventured a few feet away from me at any one time. And all the time I'd been taking Captain out to this forest, I'd never seen him act in such a way. And when I laid a hand on his neck to give him a stroke, I discovered he was actually trembling in fear. My first thought was that a mountain lion could have been in the area, but a previous encounter with what I'd figure was a predator's scent trail had caused Captain to bark incessantly and become overly aggressive. Now, this was back in the fall of last year, and that during the previous summer, the National Forest had seen a sharp increase in black bear activity, with homeowners being encouraged to be much more careful. Surrounding issues of food disposal, it was entirely possible that Captain had sniffed out a mama bear and cubs, in which he was outright terrified. I had no idea what to make of such a situation, but one thing was clear though. Captain wanted out, and consequently, so did I. There was only one big problem with such a plan. We'd already spent like 2 hours hiking in the woods. Getting out would not be quick or easy. With every step, the tension grew. Captain looking behind me with wild, terrified eyes, darting ahead before doubling back to whine at me. Each footstep seemed a little quicker than the last. My utter paranoia growing to fever pitch as I continually looked behind me and continually saw nothing. But something was behind us. Captain knew it, and I could feel it. At one point, he bounded back to my side and froze, staring off into the dense forest as he sniffed at the air before him. I thought the worst was over, but I was horribly, horribly wrong. With a yelp so loud, it hurt my ears. He burst off through the trees ahead, howling barks punctuating his canine gallop. That's when I heard it, a rustling in the trees behind me, and with a terror so rampant, I could still feel it to this day. I heard something behind me breathing, and it was huge. I just ran, following the sound of Captain's barks, crashing through the dense trees as dry branches tore at the bare skin on my face. There are many times in my life where I'd been uncomfortable, anxious, or scared. This experience dwarfed them all. No emotion can compare to that knowing you're being hunted by something something that you cannot reason or bargain with, something that will crunch your bones into meal and not feel a damned thing. I ran harder and longer than I ever have in my life, so intensely that when I finally had to stop to draw breath, I found myself dry retching against a tree trunk, out of exhaustion, out of fear, out of pure biological imperative, making me as light and mobile as possible. But there could be no respite. Captain's furious barks made that abundantly clear. We had to keep moving. It was that or be eaten alive. With tears in my eyes, I carried on running, hurtling through the forest, the thickets so dense I was running half blind, which was made painfully obvious when I caught my foot on a fallen tree trunk and was sent flying into the dirt. The impact alone knocked the wind out of me with an ugly grunt, and as I rolled onto my back, struggling for breath, I saw Captain appear at my side. He had been my hero so many times before, and wasn't about to fail me now. His barks were wild, full of rage, his sharp teeth exposed as he poured the raw force of his being into the woods behind us. It was terrifying, awe-inspiring to behold, and in that moment, I thanked God that he was on my side. But not even Captain could maintain the display, for when the unseen thing hunting us seemed to roar back through the trees, Captain was silenced. He rushed over to me, taking the collar of my waterproof coat between his teeth and trying to drag me along the forest floor. But I was renewed by terror, by biological imperative, by the damn raw need to survive. In an instant, I was back on my feet, running, panting, scrambling for life. I remember there being a moment when I was terrified that Captain might leave me, how the fear might prove too much for him to handle. There was so much of the forest for him to escape into, but he never once failed to double back and find me. Even when he was out of sight, he made sure to continue barking furiously, so I'd know exactly where to run to. That was until I burst through a set of particularly thick bushes to find Captain, stood stationary at a riverbank. It wasn't all that wide or all that deep, but it was enough of an obstacle to halt his progress. You see, Captain hated water. I don't know if it was something that happened to him as a puppy before we adopted him from the shelter, but Captain has always hated water. Pools, rivers, lakes. You couldn't get him to go within 6 feet of any of them, which is why seeing that river in our way terrified me on a whole new level. Out of pure instinct, I just jumped across. Like I said, it wasn't particularly wide, but the exhaustion of running for so long meant I only barely made the jump. I turned, knowing that Captain wouldn't even attempt the jump without encouragement or direction. My voice was trembling as I spoke. "Come on, boy, jump to mama. Please, boy, please jump, mama, come on." It was horrendous, watching his eyes so full of confusion, saying without words, "Why are you making me do this?" I watched him pacing up and down the bank as the thing hunted us grew closer and closer. In the end, I was begging him, pleading with him, promising steak dinners for an entire year if he would only get his ass across the river. For a moment, he froze, sizing up the gap before sprinting off back among the trees. Again, that terrified feeling gripped me. He couldn't do it. He was so terrified of the water that in a moment of pure panic, he'd fled back in the direction of the thing chasing us. It felt like an eternity, standing there on the riverbank, praying that he'd reappear, somehow convincing myself that he wouldn't. Only he did. In one glorious moment, he burst from the foliage, hurtling towards the river's edge at breakneck speed. As he reached the bank, his legs unfurled like springs, sending him sailing through the air, high above the river. It's funny the little details you remember from a traumatic event, and one of the things that sticks with me are Captain's eyes as he jumped that river. They were huge, these massive pale blue circles that seemed to shine out from rings of black fur around them, almost like he couldn't quite believe what he was doing, and quite frankly, neither could I. I mean it when I say he was like an action hero in some hyperbolic 80s movie, The bravery he displayed is something I feel I can only aspire to. Even his landing was dramatic as hell. He barely made it across and was scrambling up the dirt embankment when I leapt towards him, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him onto the solid ground. When we were up, he took off again with renewed speed, seemingly more terrified of the water than whatever had been stalking us. I'd had tears in my eyes before, but at that point, I broke down completely, calling after him with staggered breathing. "Good boy, Captain. Good boy." I continued to run, feeling my thighs burn and my feet ache from what felt like miles upon miles of it. I was so short of breath, so damn exhausted. I thought I might just pass out at any moment. And when I say I could literally hear my own heart beating in my throat, I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. I am not an unfit person either. I dance a lot, I take a spin class, I have stamina. But running at almost constant sprint for the better part of an hour made it feel like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. By the time I'd reached the peak of yet another gentle incline, my legs gave out from under me. I remember seeing silvery white patches appearing in my vision, and no matter how hard I drew breath, I just couldn't seem to get enough oxygen. When I saw something moving in front of me, something that definitely wasn't Captain, I thought that was it. I thought I'd pass out and never wake up again, having been torn apart by whatever wild animal was chasing us. I woke up in the back seat of a 4-seater pickup truck. As soon as I found the strength to sit up, I heard a voice outside the stationary vehicle shout, "She's awake." Suddenly, the door opened, and a person I'd never seen before in my life was offering me a plastic bottle of water and asking if I was okay. I didn't speak. I just took the water off of him and gulped like 3/4 of it down in one long, sweet chug. By the time I regained my senses, I was panicking. I couldn't see Captain anywhere. I looked at the stranger, dressed in his hunting gear, and tried to summon the strength to ask him where my dog was. Although the words just wouldn't come out. The look on my face must have told him all he needed to know. When he told me Captain was fine, and he was just inside their hunting lodge getting a bite to eat. I just cried with relief. I was overjoyed he was okay, but that's not what made me burst into tears. The hunter told me that, for a while, Captain wouldn't follow any of them out to the truck, no matter how much meat they offered him. He just stayed at my side, yapping and whining, waiting for me to wake up. For a couple of hours, I joined the hunters in their lodge, eating the hamburger they offered me, slowly, while I regained my strength. I told them exactly what had happened, how Captain had freaked out after we stumbled across what I assumed was a black bear. But black bears are relatively small, certainly not as big as grizzlies, and certainly not as big as whatever had been chasing us to the woods. I raised the issue with them and asked them what they thought it might be. I thought they might have an answer, being seasoned hunters, but they didn't. There was this awkward silence as they exchanged looks, before one of them spoke up, telling me they just didn't know. I asked if it was possible that a grizzly bear could make it this far down from the Rockies, with one responding that it was possible. But that was a lie. An outright lie. Those hunters quite possibly saved my life, and for that I will be eternally grateful. But I know they lied to me. Grizzlies don't make it anywhere near North Carolina at any time of the year. I've done a fair amount of research into what was chasing that day, but I've been unable to come up with anything conclusive. The only thing I know for sure is that those hunters were hiding something, and as long as they do, people will continue to go missing in that stretch of North Carolina woodland. Captain is lying next to my computer chair as I write this, ever faithful and ever watchful. And in my darkest moments, I wonder how I'm ever going to last without him. About 5 years ago, me and my older sister went to a nature park, a wetland, so to speak. Of course, we went at night so we could skateboard around, because you aren't allowed to. But, in front of her 24-year-old sister. Well, we just went around as the sun was setting. For a little bit, We got lost since the park was so huge and condensed with the thick woods. We were trying to find the bridge, a 20-foot or so bridge, so we can hang out just above the rushing river. By the time we got there, the sun was hardly visible over the mountains. I looked around after drinking my water, and here is where the creepy stuff happened. As I looked at the other side of the bridge, I saw a tall, skinny figure. I first shrugged it off like it was a person, maybe a ranger of the park, but then it got on all fours and walked away. I didn't say anything at first, mainly because I thought it was maybe a bear. I looked back at my sister as we chatted about boys and along many other things. Then I looked back at the end of the bridge. My sister did too, and we both saw the figure this time. At this point, I was totally freaked out. Mind you, it's still not dark out. The sky was purple and orange, so it wasn't like we were seeing things that when your mind pictures figures in the dark. No, it was right there, getting closer. I told my sister to get the hell out of there. Her going first off the bridge and down the hill. I went second, and as I turned to look at the bridge again, it was 5 feet in front of me, on all fours once again. It stood there as me and my sister skated off, and this isn't even the end. I told my sister to head to the main building since there's cameras and lots of lights. We skateboarded for what seemed like hours. Every minute seemed to last an eternity. As we finally get to the main building, we finally stopped riding our boards. Out of breath and scared, we both looked around, and by this time, it was pitch black outside. We made a mad dash to the car, taking a path we have never seen before, but it was outside the park, which made us feel safer. After we got to my sister's Jeep, we both got in, hearts racing and scared out of our minds, and when we tried to leave the gate, it was locked, meaning we couldn't leave since there was only one way in and out of the park. We got even more scared. We tried everything to get out. We even thought about just leaving the car behind and walking the 2 hours home. But we drove onto the sidewalk and got out of the park. To this day, I won't ever go back into those wetlands ever again, even in daylight. Whatever that thing was, I never want to see it again. I can't stop thinking about it, and I'm almost 19. You can think this is just a story, but it really did happen. Me and my sister don't even talk about it to this day. Something changed between us. I could feel it after that very day. I'd like to start off by saying my parents live on a plantation in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. I won't say specifically where due to privacy. Growing up, it was me and my brother, who is 4 years older than I, and he's still my best friend to this day. My dad was a farmer, so me and my brother both grew up with a love for the outdoors and adventure. We have over 7,000 acres and a total of 6 barns. My grandparents owned this land before my father inherited it. They owned slaves, and my grandfather treated them all well and even built a small community for them behind our barns so they would be close by in case they were needed. It's the 21st century, so we had no slaves. We had upgraded to farmhands by this point when I was a kid. I was 6 years old at the time of this encounter, and my brother was 10. My mother had just passed away, and it was just us 3 left. We were out one day exploring the barn. My dad was out in the fields tilling to prepare the crops we had coming in. We ended up down in the community, which was about 2 miles or so from our house, which consisted of 7 houses that were out in the woods. By this time, they were overgrown and underkept due to their lack of tenants who were in charge of upkeep. To give you a bit of insight into how these looked, I will try my best to give you a brief explanation. There were all wooden houses, 1 story of course, with a small porch and a large wooden door. They had 2 windows on each side of the front door, and windows all along the sides, all broken. The grass was waist high, and the tree limbs had broken into the windows, and some had even grown into the sides of one house. My brother was carrying a machete to chop away some of the undergrowth so we could get to them. We entered the front house that was a bit bigger than the rest, with tin on the roof and a brick chimney. The steps broke under our feet, and my brother had to help me climb up. The porch had almost completely rotted by this point. I'm not a tall girl, and my legs are especially short, making high cabinets and big steps difficult for me, even now. My brother went first, opening the door with a heavy kick from the wood being warped and disfigured. He shut the door best he could behind us. We entered the house to see most of the floor was missing, revealing grass and even small trees growing through the floor. Rodents scattered in every direction, making me yelp, but my brother just laughed. There was a mattress to the left that springs were the only thing remaining. All of a sudden, we heard a loud crack right outside the door, causing both of us to freeze where we were. My brother whispered that it was probably a deer and to be super quiet so we could see him. We both slowly crept over to one of the windows to try to see outside and catch the deer. We both had a love for animals and enjoyed watching them. As we reached the window, we heard a very hushed voice, and I very distinctly remember the deep growl of one of the voices telling the other, "Shut up. I don't know where they went, but I swear to God when we find them, we'll kill all of them. I don't care. I'll kill them before I go to jail." Then he erupted into maniacal laughter that echoed through the woods. I remember the look on my brother's face. I knew he was terrified. My brother was only 10 at the time, but he was almost 6 feet, and almost nothing scared him. If he was scared, I knew I should be. He whispered for me to crouch down so we couldn't be seen through the window. I crept down next to a rotten couch that reeked of decay. The smell alone made me gag. Tears were spilling out of my eyes, and I kept my hands over my mouth to keep my sobs quiet. I bit down so hard on my hand, I remember tasting blood. My brother was peering over the side of the window, his face white. I heard limbs breaking as the trespassers were making their way towards every house to find us. I remember thanking God that my brother had shut the door. He motioned me to come towards him, and I slowly crept to where he was, trying to make as little as noise as possible. He told me he was going to open the door, and when he did, then I needed to run all the way back to the house and try to find Dad. He kept nudging me towards the door and was getting frustrated when I wouldn't move. I heard one of the men tell the other one to check the big building, and my heart froze. The house we were in was significantly bigger than the others, and I knew they were coming for us. We heard sticks snapping from every direction, and in my child's mind, I knew we were going to die. Nothing is scarier than thinking you're going to die at such a young age. I was absolutely terrified. I was behind my brother against the wall, and he was holding my hand. I remember how sweaty his shaking hand was and how fast his heart was beating. He had the machete brandished like some sword in a sci-fi movie, and I almost chuckled at the sight. As scared as I was, the door to the house was kicked open, and there stood 4 men, standing about 6 feet or so in height. They all looked like they hadn't bathed in years, and I could smell them from where they were standing. They smelt of rotten meat and body odor. Their teeth were yellowing, some missing, and they looked like they had been beat up, covered in bruises and blood. The blonde guy in the front was the first to speak. His voice still terrorizes me to this day. "Well, look at what we have here. A knight in shining armor, and what a damn princess." He had laughed. My brother spoke in the deepest voice he could manage. This is my dad's land. You better get out. He's got guns and he'll shoot you." The blonde guy chuckled, shaking his head, and took a step towards us. The next thing he said chilled me to my core. "Your daddy can't save you. No one can. I'm your god now." He said as he took another step towards us. He looked over at me, and my blood went cold. He smiled, and I could see he only had one front tooth, and only a few were left in his menacing smile. "I love pretty blonde girls. I'd love to take you with me, my own pretty little girl. I've always wanted one." I cried out and buried my face into my brother's back as I wept, screaming for my dad. "Daddy can't save you now," he screamed, and my brother lunged toward the guy and swung the machete as hard as he could, almost knocking himself over from its weight. All three of the guys started laughing maniacally. My brother stepped closer to the men, swinging the machete again, coming inches from the blonde guy's face. He leaned back to avoid the blow and started only laughing louder. The sound was like something out of the most awful horror movie. I could hear the crackling in their voices. Their smiles made it all the more worse. All three of the men were in the house with us now, and the lanky black-haired guy shut the door behind him. They kept inching closer to us, and my brother was telling me to stay behind him as he kept the machete pointed towards them. Then, the most heavenly sound. Out of nowhere, we heard a truck horn, and my heart jumped into my throat. The road leading to the community was maybe 200 yards from the house, with few trees between it. The guys went stock straight and bolted out the door. One of their legs fell through the floor, but he quickly yanked it out and bolted. We looked out to see my dad and cousins jumping out of his truck with all their guns in hand. They fired a few shots, missing the men by only inches. My dad ran into the house and scooped me up. My brother was crying, and my dad was too. He hugged me and my brother so tight that day. My dad never let us go near the community again, and only let us go into the barns if he was with us. He told me recently he thought he were dead already, and he will never be happier than the day he found us alive. As for the guys, after my dad and cousins arrived, they bolted deeper into the woods, and my cousins pursued them but gave up after a mile or so. My cousin still swears he shot one of them in the leg, but it was never confirmed. My dad told my brother he was coming to the barn for a drink, and to the rest for a minute, and heard my screams, and they immediately followed them to us. My brother and I both received intense counseling for the next few months afterwards. I'm 22 years old now, and I still wake up in a panic, reliving the worst day of my life with those awful men. I am so thankful for my brother for doing his best to keep me alive. I'm even more thankful for my dad and cousins, and that they had given the fields a rest, even if just for a moment. God only knows what would have happened to us had they not shown up. It scares me to this day to think about it.